Welcome to the last talk. Right, so smart home devices affect the privacy of everyone who encounters them, not just the primary users who choose to buy and install them, but also other people who live or work in the household, as well as visitors and bystanders. And yes, you have seen this clip art before this session. It's an attractor. So how much control secondary or incidental users or bystanders have over what data devices collect over them, about them depends on their relationship with the primary users. Our research focused on employer-employee relationships in smart homes, specifically the case of nannies. We wanted to examine how the inherent power imbalances in that relationship affect privacy perspectives and outcomes. And amongst smart home devices, we focused on cameras because employers can more readily use them to surveil the nanny and thus affect their job satisfaction and job security. Our research questions were how are nannies' privacy attitudes, experiences, expectations, concerns, and choices with regard to working with smart home cameras shaped by their relationships with their employers? How do employers' use of cameras, their interactions with employees about cameras, reflect, reinforce, or change the power dynamics in those relationships? And we also wanted to identify any potential points of intervention for mitigating the effects of power imbalances and providing means for nannies to enact their privacy preferences. And to answer those questions, we conducted 25 semi-structured qualitative interviews with nannies, au pairs, and professional babysitters. Most of them had had direct experience working with smart home cameras. We used a thematic analysis approach to analyze the data. We began by inductively coding the transcripts with a collaboratively developed codebook. Then we reviewed coded excerpts to isolate the themes relevant to our research questions. Moving on to our findings, our participants had a wide range of privacy attitudes towards cameras in homes where they worked. At a high level, they explained those attitudes in terms of factors like the purpose of data collection. Are the cameras there to supervise or surveil the nannies, or is the nanny an incidental bystander to a camera that's there for some other reason? And especially if the cameras were used for supervision, their attitudes also depended on how they thought the cameras and the data would be used, like what positive or negative impacts they might have on the nanny's day-to-day experience on the job. And participants contextualized those views in terms of how the purposes and uses might reflect or affect their relationships with their employers. For example, some participants viewed camera use and whether cameras were disclosed as an indicator of employers' attitudes toward the nannies, affecting those relationship dynamics. Many participants became concerned about trust if they saw that employers had cameras everywhere in the house or seemed to be constantly watching them. For instance, Nanny 14 said, if they felt the need to monitor me 24/7, I would be uncomfortable with that because that shows a level of distrust. And some participants even viewed it as a signal of distrust if their employers had cameras at all. So again, there's a range. In particular, many participants viewed not disclosing cameras in the house as a potential sign of distrust, and many equated non-disclosure with disrespect. For example, Nanny 10 said, I have no problem being recorded as long as you're telling me you're doing it. It's respecting you enough to let you know. Conversely, many participants pointed out that disclosure can be a way to build mutual trust and alleviate privacy concerns by reassuring nannies that the cameras will be used respectfully. So like Nanny 7 said, there needs to be two-way communication so that I feel trust. Participants also mentioned that they would like to discuss some specific details about use and data handling, like how often the cameras were checked, because knowing more about what was happening would make them feel more comfortable. Though a couple of participants were concerned that knowing certain details might make them self-conscious. In addition to how cameras could reflect employer-employee relationships, many participants explained that their privacy attitudes depended on how cameras could affect those relationships in both positive and negative ways. Some participants had concerns about how cameras could reinforce undesirable dynamics in an employer-employee relations. For example, many were concerned about how having cameras might encourage intrusive supervision or micromanagement. So Nanny 37 said, if the purpose is to babysit me while I'm nannying the children, then I feel really uncomfortable with that. Cameras can also allow an employer to find an excuse to reprimand or fire the nanny in bad faith. Some nannies viewed it as spying if their employers watched them constantly on the camera, especially when they work with the children, like at nap time. Others view being watched at all as spying, hence the scare quotes. Different participants use that term spying differently. For example, Nanny 26 said, if they were watching me when I wasn't even with the child, I probably would leave the job. I just wouldn't feel comfortable in their home again. And some pointed out how cameras can facilitate creepy behavior or abuse. And even nannies who generally wouldn't have privacy concerns about smart home cameras might feel uncomfortable if they thought that cameras might encourage those type of negative behaviors. On the other hand, some participants viewed cameras quite positively. A couple said that they felt that rather than undermining trust, cameras could help build trust by reassuring parents that nannies are taking good care of the children. For example, Nanny 12 said, having cameras gives them the sense that I am who I said I was at the interview. Cameras can also provide proof against accusations of abuse or neglect. Like Nanny 20 saying, if the child gets a bruise, there's now proof on camera that I'm not the one that caused that to happen. Participants also described their privacy expectations and attitudes with reference to context-specific privacy norms. A nanny's workplace is also somebody's home, and care work specifically has a unique set of privacy considerations. So norms about data collection, including who gets to make decisions about it, can combine norms from those three contexts. Regarding home privacy norms, some participants viewed it as the homeowner's prerogative to install devices, for example, to protect the safety of the home and to configure it how they like. They didn't expect to have control of data collection in someone else's home. So Nanny 10 saying, we're kind of like outsiders here in their private home, so we need to maybe give in a little bit of our privacy. On the other hand, others viewed homes as private places, and so the data collection actually seemed incongruous to them. Participants cited workplace norms. They pointed out that monitoring employees is not that uncommon generally. Some also mentioned limitations on monitoring that they would expect in a professional workplace, including expectation of disclosure. For example, Nanny 4 said, for you it's a workspace, so I do think it's important to know when and where there are cameras. Participants also mentioned norms of caregiving, including parents' prerogative to be involved in their child's care. Some participants viewed monitoring as more acceptable in the context of caregiving than other types of work because of the trade-off with children's safety. So Nanny 29 said they have every right to do whatever is in their power to keep their children safe. Participants described how the potential impacts of cameras could influence whether they would accept a job or even whether they might quit a job they had. For example, if employers were micromanaging via camera or if they found a hidden camera. So Nanny 35 said, that's actually a reason why I left my previous nanny family. They would constantly check the cameras and text me. However, these kind of concerns would usually have limited weight in a nanny's job choices due to the socioeconomic realities of the job market. Generally, even though most participants thought that employers should disclose cameras so that nannies can at least de facto consent to data collection, most saw themselves as having a limited ability to demand disclosure. So as Nanny 32 put it, I would expect disclosure, but I know they don't have to. In addition, as I mentioned earlier, participants said they would like to know more about specific details, such as frequency of checking the camera feed, whether the camera collects audio or data retention, but many participants didn't feel they were in a position to ask such questions or to ask for changes to privacy settings if they even wanted such changes, for fear of violating social norms, and some were concerned that asking questions might seem suspicious, like Nanny 26 said, I don't want to make it seem like I don't want to be videotaped, but then I would like to ask because I'm curious. So implications during our analysis, we identified some potential points of intervention, such as communication at time of hire, social norms about discussing privacy settings with non-household members, design of access controls and device indicators. So to wrap up, I'll swiftly discuss some potential mitigations. First, we propose to design discussion guides to help parents and nannies navigate conversations about cameras and make it easier to introduce potentially sensitive questions, highlighting the benefits of transparency, suggesting possible topics based on some of the common questions that I mentioned, especially whether and how cameras will be used to supervise the nanny. Devices could also nudge their owners when they're configuring the settings, suggesting they discuss the settings with anyone who works in the house, providing a discussion guide. Some of our participants said they'd like to have some kind of access, for example, to be able to use the device's baby monitor. And appropriate nudges can also steer employers away from accidentally violating domestic workers' privacy. And these ideas could be supported by product design guidelines that provide nuanced guidance about specific privacy issues for domestic workers and recommendations for balancing the needs of employers and employees. So, thank you.